Science explains everything. And what it doesn't explain yet, it will eventually. So there's no need to resort to the concept of God. God is a fiction left over from the times when people didn't have the scientific knowledge we have today. Back then, people didn't understand how the universe worked, and God filled in the gaps. Those times are gone. This is one of the most popular arguments against God's existence. But is it really valid? It turns out that there are a few things that science still can't explain, and may not explain at all in the next 1,000 years. For example, science can't explain the origin of the universe, even though it has done a great job of coming up with theories. The question of origins is a serious topic, and philosophers have been arguing about it for millennia. So where did the universe come from? Theists make what's called the cosmological argument, which states that everything we know about the physical world has a cause. Nothing comes from nothing. If we follow this logic, then we must conclude that there must have been a first cause of everything. This provides a convenient explanation for existence itself. If God did not create the universe, then how did it come into being? How can something come from nothing? How can something be caused without a cause? And what is the answer from science? The leading theory is the Big Bang. According to the Big Bang theory, there is no need to explain the beginning point, because at the moment the universe came into being, at the so-called singularity, all the known laws of physics cease to apply. An explanation for the beginning of the universe is not required, because that moment was absurd in itself. Stephen Hawking developed the no-boundary proposition to describe the beginning of the universe. His Hartley-Hawking state, or theory developed with physicist James Hartley, describes a single starting point of space but not time, where there was nothing before because the universe is a closed loop. You could say that the Big Bang is the starting point, just as the North Pole is the beginning of the Earth. But in reality, it is simply the northernmost point. There is nothing further north, just as there is nothing before the Big Bang. The universe is therefore completely self-sufficient. The Hartley-Hawking theory has its critics, and there are other scientific theories about the origin of the universe. Steady-state theory, string theory, and plasma cosmology all have their own ideas. But what unites all these theories is that they are still theories. When it comes to the origin of the universe, no one knows for sure. Not you, not me, not even Stephen Hawking. If science cannot give a definitive explanation for the origin of the universe, can it better explain the origin of life? Our life, alive, conscious, self-aware, suddenly arose from non-living matter on its own. It is an absurd concept, because a saucepan or a cupboard cannot reproduce on its own. But is there a scientific explanation for the emergence of life? Yes, there is, and it is not at all convincing. Any scientific explanation must address the serious problem of which came first, the chicken or the egg. Life, as we now know, requires information, which we also now know is encoded in DNA, the polymer that is essentially the manual for how every organism works, grows, and reproduces. But how could life arise without the information it requires, DNA? And how could information arise without life? How, in other words, could something as complex as DNA form on its own, out of nothing? The latest theory, again just a theory, is the RNA world hypothesis, which proposes that RNA, a simpler molecule, came first, paving the way for DNA. But RNA is still incredibly complex, and it's also hard to imagine that it could have arisen on its own. Even its proponents acknowledge its shortcomings, with one calling it the worst theory of the early evolution of life, except for all the others. Despite all the amazing advances science has made in understanding the brain, science can't explain human consciousness. More precisely, we can't explain experience itself. Explaining consciousness is such a difficult task that philosophers have dubbed it the hard problem of consciousness. This is in contrast to the easy problem of consciousness. The easy problem concerns how the brain works, how we perceive things, how we process information, how we feel, think, and react. Science has gotten pretty good at that. But the hard problem, how all of these processes lead to our experience of the world, remains a mystery. David Chalmers, a philosopher of consciousness and professor of philosophy and neuroscience at New York University, coined the term hard problem in a 1995 paper. Chalmers asks a simple but interesting question. For example, why do we feel sad when we hear a sad song? Why do we feel anything at all? There is no explanation, either in the physical world or in the evolutionary process, for how consciousness arose from matter so that we could experience anything. We can explain how the brain evolved physically, but we cannot explain how the leap from physical to conscious occurred. We can explain how the brain evolved physically, but we cannot explain how the leap from physical to conscious occurred. In fact, how could the brain evolve physically if consciousness was not there to inform us through our experiences of the world and thus guide us toward survival and, presumably, evolution? There is one way around this paradox. Simply deny the existence of consciousness. Daniel Dennett, a famous philosopher, scientist, and convinced atheist, does just that. He denies the existence of consciousness, thereby instantly solving the hard problem of consciousness. In his view, consciousness is just an abstraction, an illusion, and there is no need to worry about it so much. Indeed, there is a whole school of philosophy called illusionism, which claims that consciousness is a fiction, a product of our brain's imagination. But you might say, okay, maybe science can't explain everything without theories now, but in the future, all these questions will surely be solved by science, right? But no. If there is something in the universe that goes beyond the material world, science will never be able to help us with it, because anything that goes beyond the natural world is outside its competence. There is the material world, and then there is the spiritual world. Science can only work with the first, but that does not rule out the possibility of the second, which does not obey the laws of science and therefore remains undetected. Scientists understand this, and perhaps that is why a survey conducted by the Pew Research Center showed that 51% of scientists believe in God. Listen to quantum physicist Erwin Schrödinger, famous for his concept of Schrödinger's cat. I am very surprised that the scientific picture of the real world around me is so incomplete. It knows nothing of the beautiful and the ugly, of good and evil, of God and eternity. And it is not only that these concepts are outside the realm of science. The question is also how to get the right perspective for studying them. Nobel laureate physicist Max Planck, who is called the father of quantum physics, put it this way: science cannot solve the ultimate riddle of nature. And the reason for this is that, ultimately, we ourselves are part of nature, and therefore part of the mystery we are trying to solve. Think about how we study consciousness. As conscious beings, we try to use our consciousness to study it. See the problem? We are inside the system, but we are trying to study the external reality. And here's another thing. Science assumes that there is an objective reality that can be studied. But what is this assumption based on if we cannot go beyond that reality? Good question. Max Planck gave only one answer to this. Above the gates of the Temple of Science are written the words, "You must have faith." Faith precedes reason, even in science, even in the origin of the universe, the origin of life, the nature of human consciousness. All this seems to remain a mystery, leaving room for speculation about the existence of God. If you are determined not to believe for whatever reason, you will find stronger arguments against God's existence. But there are also powerful arguments for his existence. And there are many more of these arguments.